Splitting the difference between the two clocks on the wall here, I'll declare the meeting officially beginning. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the media, to a few guests. And let's dive into this. First of all, apologies. The only one I'm aware of is Chairman Rex. I'm not sure anyone has heard from Debbie.
Running late.
She's running.
Well, she should be here. I was talking about 10 minutes ago.
All right. We'll take note of that. Will somebody, do I need somebody to move the apology?
I'll second that.
Mr. Curtin and Mr. Parker.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for that. I have some notices. We're moving on to, where is the actual agenda? There it is. Moving on to notices, some agenda adjusting here needs to go on this morning. We're getting there. We're getting there. Patience. Patience. First of all, item 9 on the agenda, Environment Court Declaration, is going to be withdrawn at this time for reasons that'll become clear as we discuss the Rotanifa Water Storage Scheme special agenda item. There was a late addition of information regarding our discussion of the Freshwater Improvement Fund, which was listed as a late item, item 23. And that basically is information that supports the discussion we'll be having under item 12, Freshwater Improvement Fund. So that's that. Welcome, Debbie. And then we have the other late item agenda, which is the discussion of the Supreme Court decision, the implications of that on the Rotanifa Dam, et cetera. And I'm going to move from the chair that late item be accepted for consideration at this meeting in accordance with Standing Order 9.12, as this issue cannot be delayed due to the need to provide certainty to councils and HBRIC Limited stakeholders and investors and the Capital Structure Review Panel by signaling council's intentions regarding the Rotanifa Water Storage Scheme. So could I have a seconder to take this matter up as a special item? Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, point of order, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, is this an item for consideration of council as opposed to committee?
In the first instance, it's being considered as a matter of committee. If we arrive at any resolutions, we would have the option of seeking unanimous consent for those. So we'll see how that develops in the course of the day here, I guess. And so we'll take that item up as our first decision item after we get through some of these other housekeeping matters. So are there any conflict of interest?
Sorry, Peter's seconded it.
Somebody have to vote on that. Yep. Peter was the seconder. I was the mover. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Conflict of interest declarations. Any conflict of interest declarations? Appear to be none. Okay. And so that takes us to confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of May 17.
Mr. Chairman, just before you do that, in terms of taking this item 24 as first decision item, I wasn't able to open this on my tablet, so this is the first I've seen of it. Can I suggest that it be delayed until after morning tea so that there's a chance to read this paper?
Any other views on that? It's fine.
Thank you.
Pleased to.
Mr. Chairman, the notices?
I'm sorry, other notices, yes.
Yes, just in terms to the positions that there was two in the last term, few terms, there's been 2 positions for the Maori Committee. With agreement with the Maori members of the Regional Planning Committee, they asked that they have 1 on these standing committees. We agreed to that, so that for this particular meeting it's Brian Gregory. The fact that nobody has attended from that committee is actually not our business. We thought that they would follow through on what they strongly requested, and I'm just here as ex officio. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question? So when was that decision made?
Well, it was a request between the two, say, just after the elections.
Oh,
It was actually prior to the elections.
Just, sorry, I should have brought this up earlier. I've got a doctor's appointment at 2:30, Chair. So.
Okay. Any other notices? And then we will go on to the minutes. If we can just page through those for accuracy. Any comments on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8? Someone like to move the minutes are accurate? Please. Councillor Bailey, second. Councillor Curtin. All those in favor? Aye. Any matters arising from the minutes? Would appear to be none. And so we just simply move on, I guess. Follow-ups. All right. As part of, I guess, no, a separate item here, follow-ups to the previous meeting, which are reported in your main agenda paper. And who is going to handle that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to remind, number 1 is item 21 of today, so we'll deal with it there. Number 2 is item 17 of today, so we'll deal with that as part of those items.
All right. There are a number of biodiversity, pest management.
Which had Campbell's name alongside them, and I think the explanations are clear there. They've either been dealt with and or adopted, so.
Yep, okay.
On item number 5,
5.
Chair, I can report that we have heard back from Professor Huey. He's expressed great enthusiasm about both having a larger sample of their survey in the Hawke's Bay region so that we could get the pulse of environmental perceptions in Hawke's Bay, and also expressed interest in us potentially doing a separate study as part of the survey on particular issues of interest to our council. So we're going to build that into the work program for next year's survey.
Super.
I'm not sure these... I'm not hearing... Can anyone else... The light's on. Can anyone else hear? I don't think they're actually going.
Lights on.
Yeah. Someone's turned... No. How's that? Is that better? No? No? Leanne, still not going? I can't hear. It's not.
The volume is at 3. I could take that up, I guess.
That's better.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. How about 5? Settle on 5? Going once, going twice? 5 it is? All right. Ian, I think number 6.
No, Chair, so Mr Miller, who's acting GM on Liz's, Liz is on leave, will cover off the next 2 items.
Okay.
So item 6 is feedlots.
Mm-hmm.
That had a question around the whether the feedlots that have been consented recently were existing or not. They are all existing feedlots, have been established for periods of time. One I mentioned has told us they have been operating in that manner for 38 years. there's also a mention of the staff to develop a rule change and refer to the Regional Planning Committee. So no steps have been taken in that space yet, but part of the consenting has looked to include conditions for monitoring, which I think will help inform any rule change in the future.
Right.
Question, Chair?
Any questions?
Yeah.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I understand, I appreciate that you've made a mention in there that no steps have been taken to prepare a standalone plan. I can only assume that's because you're waiting for Plan Change 6 to take effect in the Tuki catchment.
Well, there's a few things sort of, I guess, a few balls in the air in the discussion I've had. There is a need to program it or fit it into the program if there is to be a change. With the feedlots, we've seen that there is a connection to Plan Change 6 that in 2 years, if they're in a catchment, if they're exceeding their LUC entitlement, or if they're in a catchment which is exceeding the 0.8 DIN, then they're actually going to be brought in as needing a consent under the production land use rule, and then they'll have to integrate their whole operation and look at the whole of farm operation. So the feedlot will have to integrate with the rest of the operation, and they'll have to be accounting for the full effects of feedlot and farming on that property.
So in following up from that, then I assume, and that's fine. I'm happy that we're not going to go and do a change to the RRMP when we don't have to for a couple of years, when something's going to take effect in a couple of years. So that same process is going to roll out for every other catchment as we go through the plan changes going north.
We're anticipating Tank is going to be asking sort of questions around feedlots and elsewhere, but the feedlot rule is actually generic to the region, so there's a need to sort of also look at how that would apply if it was changed in one location, should it be changed in all locations? So that's sort of part of the questioning, and there is a program to review the regional plan 2020 to actually look at the whole of the plan document as it applies across the region.
Can I just make a comment, Chair, that I would have liked to have seen that. I mean, I think the wording of that particular paragraph in the comments or the status is a little bit confusing, in that if I was reading that as a member of the public, I would assume that nothing's going to be done. It's just a clarification thing.
So, Malcolm, just another follow-up question. We've got 10 applications that we've received for feedlots. We know that there are 1,100 FEMPs going to have to be made for that area, and the vast majority of farms down there, I think, are beef or mixed beef farming. And I can't help thinking there must be a hell of a lot more than 10 feedlots, and I know maybe some of them don't require to be consented, but I'm really concerned that we are only dealing with the tip of the iceberg here. Are we taking any steps to be satisfied that there aren't a whole lot more feedlots that aren't being reported to us or aren't applying for consents that should be?
Well, we are, from a compliance monitoring point of view, looking to be more present across the whole area. So we are talking about putting planes up to actually fly the area and look to see if there's other ones which are more obviously operating as a feedlot. We've relied on the discussions that we've had with the community, brought a lot of the community into public meetings to inform them of the rule or the rules, and we've really relied on them to have a discussion with us and determine whether they need a consent or not. And it's then up to them as to whether they apply or they don't. And some of them could have, in understanding the rule, could have decided to operate a bit differently to try and remain within the terms of the permitted activity, and that's their right. But if they operate and then get to the point where they've actually carried on in a manner that means they are now a feedlot, then we would be looking to see if we can pick them up.
All right, so feedlots are a winter activity. So if we're going to do some monitoring in that catchment to determine whether we've sourced all of or the vast majority of the feedlots, that's going to be something that the drones or planes or whatever, it's going to be something we'll have to do this winter, right?
Yes.
So I'd quite like us to get a report perhaps getting into spring as to a report back on what we've found and what we're doing about it.
Any other comment? I guess I'm still not clear. Are we planning, if new rules are required, are we planning to implement those catchment by catchment as part of our plans for the individual catchments, or are we ultimately contemplating, as was requested, a rule change specifically dealing with this issue?
I think I could be possibly a little clearer. We will bring back the question to councillors of whether or not a catchment by catchment or regional approach is preferable. But what we've said in here is that with all of the work on various planning activities, there is not currently work being undertaken on that question. It is programmed in to do over the next 12 months or thereabouts, and it will certainly be something that will be considered during the tank process, but that we've got no dedicated work on that very question this very day.
Right, and so it would be informed by this winter's observation.
Look, it will, and there is a large body of activity going on in terms of both engagement with the farmers on the ground, the consenting process that you're aware of, the compliance work that Mr. Wright will be doing through this winter, and we will be in a better point. Obviously that will align with the land use rules that will be coming through the tank process and the discussions around that. So all of this will come together over the next 12 months, but we're not coming back with you immediately with advice on the rule change at this point in time, and it would be our advice that it would be premature to do so. But we haven't been given a reporting date at this point by the council on that rule change. If you would like to set one, then I would suggest that it be at the conclusion of this winter period, and we provide advice along with the advice that Councillor Bevan's just requested on what we've found through our compliance activity. It seemed to be that bringing all that together as a package in the spring would make sense.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just one further question. It's more of a question of clarification because I wasn't quite sure in my head. You'll definitely be setting up a plane this winter to have a look to see if we can find all the feedlots in the Hawke's Bay region?
I looked at Wayne. Wayne's nodding.
All right. I think we don't need to say anything more. That the general timetable you're saying, I think, makes sense to us. Spring at some point is finite enough, I guess. Number 7, well, it's on the agenda later on. 8 as well.
That's item 20 today, Mr.
Yep, and the field trip has been organized. It's scheduled for next Wednesday, I believe, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that completes that agenda item. Is there any last comments on any of those? All right, and we are moving on to Councillor Bevan, a second. Councillor Bailey. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Call for minor items on the agenda. Mr. Barker.
The Manawatu Gorge closure.
Are there any
Mr. Chair,
other?
yes.
Councillor Bevan?
Riparian strips.
Any others? Councillor?
Visit by the Associate Minister for the Environment.
Visit by Associate Minister. And are there any others? So we have 3, all right, duly noted. So we're going to defer item 20, the special item, and I guess that brings us right up to Campbell Leckie and business investment in biodiversity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this item today, essentially, in terms of achieving the overall outcomes we want, in terms of biodiversity, our regional biodiversity strategy and the implementation plan, business investment in biodiversity is going to be very important to achieving those outcomes. What I'd like to talk to you today about is the context and background around one potential partnership that we might have, and that to seek your guidance on whether or not you want to progress that partnership. Now the context behind that is that probably about 3.5, 4 months ago, I was contacted via Predator Free New Zealand, who had been contacted by OMV New Zealand Limited, who are a petrochemical exploration company. OMV had discussed with Predator Free NZ the opportunity for investing in predator control across New Zealand, particularly in light of the PFNZ 2050 announcement and the government funding that was associated with that in terms of leverage. Because of the success of the Cape to City project, PFNZ New Zealand said, hey look, there's this project going on in the Hawke's Bay, you might actually be interested in investing there. And so I brought that back to the exec team here, and I understand subsequently a discussion in principle with councillors as to whether or not you wanted me to go and speak to OMV to progress what the partnership might be if it was going to happen. I had that conversation with OMV New Zealand staff, 8 of them their Customer Services Relation Group in Wellington, about 6 weeks ago. And as a result of that conversation, trying to understand what they wanted from an investment and also what the context of any potential partnership might be. And that is essentially the paper you have before you, which talks about OMV's context and also talks about where potentially a partnership might take place in this region. And the context around that is they have agreed in principle to put up around $50,000 a year for 4 years as a minimum starting investment, with the potential for that to be leveraged with PFNZ 2050. And that is a conversation that still needs to take place. It's not a given that we'd get that leverage funding. But if we did, and if we applied our own funding to this, then potentially we could start on the vision of a predator-free mahia with the intention of working first to remove possums and then integrating other predator pests in. In terms of really the conversation around effectively what I'd like is your guidance on this. Now, in the end, we, as part of achieving the outcomes for our community, build a whole range of partnerships with industry and other stakeholders. And at the same time, we have to manage the reality that we have a regulatory role and may well end up in a regulatory environment with some of those partnerships or stakeholders. So I would close it there, but I'd seek your guidance on whether or not you want us to progress this partnership, and happy to take any questions.
I've got 2 questions, Campbell. The first one is would this project, if it proceeds, is it part of what the Biodiversity Trust will manage, or is it managed separately?
I think at this stage, it's actually too early to answer that question with real clarity. I think the Biodiversity Foundation or the Trust would eventually manage many of these sorts of projects. And the good reason for that is that potentially then they would have a whole lot of leverage funding flowing through their coffers, some of which would sit there for a while and earn interest and provide them greater scope and impact. So I think in principle the answer to that would be yes, but it's very early yet to say if that is actually going to happen.
Okay, and my second question, in some ways more important, OMV, the company that's offering the sponsorship, do they have any exploration territory within the area that we are proposing to cover with a special plan?
So to my understanding, the answer to that question is yes, and I believe they have one exploration permit currently, which could take place within the area of effectively our regulatory process.
Yeah, so that's a definite yes, there's definitely a crossover?
So that is a definite yes, there is one permit that I'm aware of that they discussed down there.
Which is offshore?
Which is, I believe, well, actually I'd need to be clear on that. I'm not 100% sure on the offshore-onshore context. But they have one which my understanding is in the southern part of this region. But that doesn't, of course, exclude them from applying for future permits.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Campbell, can you just advise in your consideration of this paper what consideration to the Council's investment policy you gave, and what is it in terms of the entities we're likely to invest or have invested in us?
So firstly, Councillor Curtin, I'm not 100% sure I understand your context of your question, so let me test that I've got that right first. When you say the investment context here, you're talking about potential partnerships with business and biodiversity as an investment context?
So I mean, if you came to us with a proposition to for sponsorship, say by a landmine company, what would we say from Council's perspective on that proposition?
So I suspect that the answer to that is, and I stand to be corrected by the exec team or our CE, but I suspect there is not currently a specific policy dealing with this, and that we are clearly at the start of that conversation, and essentially that's probably my comment.
If I could interject there, I inquired of the staff whether there was a policy that would apply here, and there is none. There's nothing in our long-term plan or the financial strategy embedded in there that speaks to constraints of any kind of this nature, whether that would be us investing or us receiving. So there is no guidance at this point. Councillor Bailey had previously asked for this to be addressed, and the plan is for it to be addressed as a broader policy issue in the upcoming long-term planning process, but at the moment there is no guidance from that source. Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Leckie, the Mahia project has been on in and around the books for a long time. Just how critical is the Whangawahi project and the collaborative nature of the peninsula at the moment to actually having success with this? I would have thought it'd be pretty good.
Oh, look, the Whangawahi project is probably one of the flagship catchment management projects in this region. It's been significant both in terms of what it's achieved on the ground and in terms of what it's actually achieved around gathering the community towards a more integrated view of how to do both ecological restoration, pest control, etc. on Mahia Peninsula. And the fact that they got the Supreme Award for the Green Ribbons, or the awards previously, is a good example of that.
So just to follow that up, Chair, if we, and we do have no policy, which is good that that's been clarified, if we pick and choose who we're going to partner with, does that place any pressure on success or otherwise of getting predator-free 2050 funding as an example? I know it's early days and you probably can't answer that with clarity, but if we want, are they interested in multiple leverage, or are they happy just for us to go on our own? I'm talking about predator-free 2050.
So the way the funding formula for Predator-Free 2050 works is that the government puts up $1 out of the $5 million pot that I've got there for regional predator control operations, and $2 additional are found by other stakeholders. PFNZ 2050 would most likely be a significant stakeholder in finding additional business funding, so they'll bring their own funding to that conversation around leverage government money, but I suspect that they would anticipate others would try and do so as well.
So that would put us in a fairly strong position if we turned up with the $2 first.
Yes, it would. Yes.
Thank you. Campbell, I'm just looking for a little bit of history, and I look on the map, and obviously Mahia is completely in our area. I suspect a lot of Gisborne people use that area as a resting ground annually. How did you come to choose Mahia to be taking on this project? It looks ideal geographically, but what other options were there?
So look, there are a range of options that you could potentially put on the table for this sort of partnership right now around predator control. Other examples would be Whakaki, Whatuma, Ahuriri Estuary, Tutira, Poutere Altane. So there's a range of places you could go. The reason why Mahia is at this stage the most logical choice is probably three key reasons. Firstly, Mahia Peninsula and turning that predator-free aligns to the Cabinet goals, which sets the funding context for PFNZ 2050, so there's a direct alignment to national goals around why they give this funding out. The second reason would be the one that Councillor Wilson has raised, that we have a very successful catchment group there who have coalesced public view and leadership around ecological restoration, so that's really valuable. And the third and final one is, because it's a peninsula, it's an extremely good site for eradication of pests, because your reinfestation issues are clearly significantly less.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your paper, Campbell. My question is, how well do you think it's known in the wider business and philanthropic, well, the other places? I still get my head tangled on that word. Out there that we would be open to these sort of partnerships for the sort of dollar value that you're talking about in this particular partnership.
So again, just to be clear that I understand the question correctly, so if the question is in terms of other philanthropic interests out there, looking at our willingness to partner with these sorts of investment, how important is that to their context? The answer to that, quite frankly, would be fairly important based on my experience to date. We've clearly fielded this with other philanthropic partners just to test their view as well, so the answer would be fairly important.
Other commercial operations throughout Hawke's Bay, for example, that would maybe be prepared to stump up with a similar sort of dollar value to become involved in this sort of issue? I mean, is it well known out there in the commercial community that these opportunities are available for them?
So the very short answer to that is no, it's not. And actually that's a significant job and an opportunity for us as a council, alongside our community and the biodiversity implementation group. There's a real opportunity for us to build the understanding in our business community about the urgency of investment in biodiversity, the potential for where they can have impact in their investment, and the places in this region where they could actually go and invest.
Like I just said, Councillor, it's a very good question, and that's the very reason that in the development of the biodiversity strategy process, moving into implementation, a trust and a foundation is looking to be established, because we're aware that there is quite a large amount of wealth around the globe that may well be interested in investing in this region under a biodiversity strategy through a well-managed trust and foundation with good governance and good project outcomes. So we're ripe for that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Cam, I'm sure one of the reasons why you've brought this proposal to us is because there's a very obvious conflict of interest between what this council is proposing to do and the interests of the company that's offering the money. So in your conversations with them, what are the conditions for the providing of this three-year fund, I think it is?
It's a 4-year fund. The conditions they've set essentially, and there's a bit of detail to be worked through on this, I think, as well, but what they've said, and some of those are outlined in the actual paper, but they don't expect a whole lot of branding and profile around this. What they really are, the conditions are, firstly, a sound plan for how their money is going to be used wisely. Secondly, they are very keen to ensure that there's a reporting context in place so they can see over time that they're actually, it's being used well. Thirdly, they're very keen to, part of this for them is about building relationships in local communities. And so they're very keen to have one of the conditions is their staff can attend probably once a year and participate in some of the activities around either the pest control or translocations or whatever's going on. So those are the, if you like, conditions discussed to date. Yep.
I'd like you to comment on how you think, in your opinion, or the Chief Executive's opinion, how the actions of this regulator, which we are, has been affected by any financial contribution or relationship we have with any other entity. I ask the question because I'm getting the impression that because some particular organisation undertakes some work, makes some money, that there is implication this could in fact affect our impartiality to do what we're supposed to do here. And I'm thinking of the fact that we have fearlessly and without favour regulated air quality controls for everybody in this region. We have fearlessly and without favour regulated what's going into our rivers and prosecuted at council. We have fearlessly and without favour implemented regulations in a whole range of areas. Now, what is it that you think could possibly happen in this regard which would affect our ability to be impartial and fearless regulators and to carry out our responsibilities?
I'll defer to my Chief Executive.
Councillor, I have no concerns at all about this proposal having any impact on our ability or our willingness as an organisation to regulate oil and gas or any other matter. Indeed, the Local Government Act explicitly requires that our regulatory functions remain separated from our other interests as a council, and that we maintain a degree of independence in the way we conduct our regulatory business. So there's nothing in this proposal that gives me any cause for concern. And just while I have the floor, I have just been advised that there are no active exploration permits within our either our marine or territorial environment held by OMV. And as the council is aware, there is a block-offer process underway involving some parts of our marine environment, but no indications at this point in time that OMV are involved in those.
Chair, a question to the Chief Executive there. Does that include permit number 57073, which is current as of today? Was issued for 15 years back in 2015. Are you suggesting that OMV is now withdrawn from that?
So, look, I've just had advice from Rena Douglas, who is our in-house expert on this, and she has checked, and that's our understanding. I'm not bringing up that that block presently, but look, we can follow that up.
That was the information I got from the website of the New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals last night.
Can you just give me the number again?
57073.
57073. Look, we'll follow that up. That is contrary to our understanding at the moment.
Councillor, do
I
you have a
haven't got a
question?
question, but I'm actually prepared to move the recommendation.
I have one last question, then I'm happy to do that. I want to go back to where Councillor Bevan started with his question. Sorry about that. Personally, I'd like to expunge predator control from our vocabulary over the remaining 2.5 years of my term in favor of biodiversity enhancement, as you know. And because I tend to look at these propositions as driven by biodiversity goals, it is important to me as to where this fits in or has been considered by our vaunted biodiversity strategy group, and whether if they had their druthers, would this be a project they'd put on the top of their list? Are we preempting their process by making a decision of this sort? From what I've been told, this is a subject that has never been discussed by the biodiversity strategy group. So are we or are we not preempting the role of that group?
So no, I don't think we're preempting the role of that group. The implementation plan will take quite a period of time to both build its clarity on what it's going to be through a range of processes like the ecosystem services analysis that's being done now, and the discussion amongst the group as to what are the priorities, and then there will be the requirement to actually start to align resources, including agency resources, to deliver those priorities. It is highly likely, if you were to look across the actual regional biodiversity context and the social and cultural context, which is still very important in this discussion around biodiversity, that you would choose Mahia Peninsula for a range of reasons, including both threatened and nationally threatened bird species, ecosystem types such as NIMS sites, and other reasons which you would select it for a biodiversity priority.
So the case may well be there, but we've not had that discussion in the forum that we have set up to have such discussions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to move the recommendation. Seconder.
Councillor Wilson seconds. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Is it seconded?
Councillor Wilson did.
Oh, okay, thank you. Right, well, look, I think this is a serious, genuine offer, and I see no reason at all why it should not be taken up willingly and gratefully. First of all, it has been made very clear that this organisation will separate its regulatory and service provision functions. It's just in the nature of things that happens every day. And secondly, this is not without precedent for an organisation, and in particular a petroleum exploration organisation, to come in from outside into another community, and in particular our community, and to make a visible indication, tangible indication of its willingness to be a good corporate citizen. And I recall back into the late 1990s when the oil company did exploration and exploratory drilling in Wairau. I can't remember the name of the... Westie, yeah. And what they came to the community with as a gesture of good faith was significant tertiary education grants, and those were offered without any precondition or requisite, so that that precedent is there, and I believe there is no good reason to refuse it, and there's every reason to take it up most willingly and gratefully.
Councillor Curtin.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move an amendment to...
Point of order, Chair. The seconder hasn't spoken. Two need to speak.
Would you like to speak?
Absolutely. This is, as has been discussed, a great opportunity for Mahia Peninsula, a project that's been kicked around for a long, long time. And the stars are aligning, if you like, in regard to a willing community, because that has been a stumbling block in the past. An able and willing community that has got the, if you like, the coordination, the willpower and the drive to actually deliver this, because that has to be a consideration of this council. If we're going to embark down this path, will we have success in the end? And as has already been demonstrated by the Whangawahi group, which basically encompasses people from right throughout the peninsula and further afield, is they can make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. They've been doing that for a long time with not a lot of money. A lot of will, a lot of compassion, a lot of grunt, a lot of collaboration, community pride, etc. The Mahia Peninsula is quite unique. It will be, if this does go ahead, it would become one of the largest mainland islands, I think you'd call it, with such predator control. You know, ridding that place of possums would be a heck of a start. Back to the sponsorship or the partnership or whatever you want to call it. I actually think OMV have come out in a process that will actually put more focus on what they do in Hawke's Bay. This will be a very public matter, and the fact that if we do partner with them on this particular issue, our regulatory space will be even more intense, I would have thought, with OMV because of the public nature of this relationship. So I don't see any pitfalls with this, as Councillor Dick says. Westec have done this in the past. In fact, someone sitting at this table was a recipient of one of those. Or family member was a recipient of that fund. So there's no great surprise in any of this. This has been done before, been done without fear or favour, and this particular project actually has a huge chance of success. So I think it's worth pursuing.
Before I recognize you, Councillor Curtin, Chief Executive informs me that Councillor Bailey is correct. There is a tract that OMV is part of an applicant for, so that is the situation. Councillor Curtin.
Well, Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do is move an amendment to the recommendation, and at 2.2, and I'm suggesting that we delete Hawke's Bay Regional Council, agrees that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council delete Hawke's Bay Regional Council and insert the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Group. Can't remember what their formal title is, but I'm suggesting we substitute the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, delete Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and insert the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Group. I think that's the name of the entity. Trust.
Well, the problem with that resolution is we
Yeah.
can't agree on someone else's behalf.
That's right.
We can only agree on our own behalf.
Chair, then therefore we recommend that the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Group partner with them. So change that, agree to recommend.
Is there a seconder for that?
Before, I'm not wanting to second it, I won't second it. But how can we make recommendations about some other entity we've had no advice from? I find this...
Well, they're in the point, really, isn't it?
Look, can I also just advise councillors, the trust is yet to form, so look, I understand the intent, councillor. We just have a difficulty in that we don't yet have a trust, and it's not yet in a position to.
It's foreshadowed, though. Surely there's a...
Certainly, it's foreshadowed.
Yes, it is. And we're
Well, it's in the
supportive
process
of
of
this
being
entity. And here we...
So I don't hear a seconder. Would anyone else like to speak to
Well, I'll speak then, Mr. Chair, if I may.
You may.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chair, and this is the point here is this is the weakness in this proposal, is that we have invested significantly in the biodiversity group. We've given it our green light and imprimatur to develop and to proceed. We are enthusiastic supporters of it, and yet here is the first opportunity to help develop and launch this entity, and we have not consulted with them. We have not offered this opportunity for this group to participate in something which would in fact be very significant in establishing and setting them up. So I'm disappointed that that opportunity is not being taken up at this point. It should have been. What it says is that the Regional Council will proceed on its own in this regard, will not partner with Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Group, will not seek their advice on it. So I'm very disappointed that staff have presented a paper that rides right over consideration of our important biodiversity strategy. The second point I'd like to make, Mr. Chair, is that as has been identified, this group, OMV, Petroleum, and we can get all warm and fluffy about their goodwill, etc. But how consistent is it with our newfound approach and in terms of oil and gas exploration in the region? And it's akin, if you like, we went through a long period of time in New Zealand's history supporting, for example, tobacco companies to sponsor Benson Hedges opens, etc. So we've got a history of going through and engaging with entities that ultimately we come to a conclusion that they are not good for our health and our environment. So, Mr. Chair, I'm really challenged to think that given our recent aspirational view around oil and gas exploration, that we are at this point quite prepared to jump into bed with this group. And if you think that these groups do it for the love of communities in New Zealand, well, you need to get new glasses. This is a situation where we need, as a council, to say no this is our position, and we ought to move to find other partners much more aligned to our thinking than a redundant dinosaur such as an oil and gas company.
Would any other speakers? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Campbell, for this paper. One of the first questions you asked was, were we supportive of, you floated the idea of these biodiversity type partnerships with commercial and philanthropic organisations. Absolutely, I totally agree with that direction. I think that's a great way to be looking forward in the world. I'd also like to point out that I have absolute confidence in our regulatory arm to be able to manage the issue of when IMV comes and handle that as they should, impartially. However, IMV does have exploratory interests in the Hawke's Bay Regional Council jurisdiction. Admittedly, they're offshore, and it's only a very minor part that actually comes into our jurisdiction, but nevertheless, it is there. At the best, I see this partnership. I mean, and that's another key thing for me is when we're talking about partnerships, partners are people that you want to do business with. Partners are people that you want to deal with all the time. So I think to me the key question there is who is the partner, and do we want to partner with these people? Because at the very best, I see this offer from AMV as nothing more than buying their social licence to operate in this community. At its very worst, I think we are putting ourselves in a position of the perception of a conflict of interest. Now, the key word there is that perception thing. I don't know whether it will or not, because I have confidence in our regulatory arm, but it is the perception out there in the public. I think that's a real issue for us where you have to deal with. I also have to ask, what is this, accepting this offer, what would it mean to our vision of becoming a carbon neutral Hawke's Bay? That to me is a really bold and a really good vision that we need to really encompass and take on board. As Councillor Curtin has pointed out, we've also taken a position around oil and gas exploration here in Hawke's Bay, and I wonder how it fits in with that. So to me, this comes down to it's not this particular, and it's not a. To me, it's not a business decision in terms of how I look at this particular proposition. It's simply one for me. It's a moral and ethical issue about who we're actually partnering with. So Campbell, I'd like to say yes, please. If you come up with there are commercial interests out there in the Hawke's Bay and in the wider New Zealand community who aren't aware of the benefits that can come from this sort of stuff. Absolutely, I think we should go and approach those people, but we have to be careful who we approach. So, to my mind, I will not be supporting this motion, only because of that moral and ethical issue, not because of the work that's been put in by staff, and not because of the idea of biodiversity partnerships. Thank you.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Campbell. Thank you to you and your team for bringing this paper to us today, and I'm pleased to support it. I think it was maybe 2 years ago we as a council went over to the Taranaki region, and we had a good look at the oil and gas exploration activities, and one of the key things for me that came out of that visit was the amount of social good that the companies were investing in the region, and there were just huge beneficiaries socially. So in terms of attracting an investor like that here into our community, I think it's a really, really good thing. I look forward to, I see here you've got maybe the 13th of November, an evening investing in biodiversity with impact function. I think that's a great opportunity to be socialising the opportunity to attract more funding in this space, and if we can get that flagged into our diaries sooner rather than later, that would be helpful as well. If that goes true to plan, then I certainly would welcome the opportunity to attract further sponsors and get other areas in the region benefiting from this sort of sponsorship as well. So congratulations on bringing this paper to us today, and thank you. I will be supporting it.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Parker.
Yes, I'm going to speak in favour of the paper. I think it's right that councils are cautious about conflicts of interests, the appearance of conflicts of interests, and so on. There's nothing can be more debilitating for public confidence than people believe that there are things which are unseen and decisions are influenced by things which they don't know. That's why every day we come to a council meeting, we have a conflict of interest register. The purpose of this is conflicts of interest are always going to happen. It's not trying to avoid them completely, it's managing them. And managing them is part about being transparent, so people can see. So, this here proposal fills that. It's transparent. It's on the table, direct, everybody knows. Now, the second thing about that is how do we react to them? Do you think that someone putting $50,000 or whatever that money is into a budget is going to buy my vote and change my view? Well, if you think that, more fool you. Never going to do that at all. And I have to say, I don't think that will apply. They'll be the same for every person who's a councillor around this table. I value the moral integrity of these councillors. And for people to imply that this contribution is going to morally compromise any councillor on this, I reject absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not going to cave into that sort of craven type of thinking at all. The second thing, third point I want to make. So you can cast these things as moral and ethical. Well, for anybody to say, I'm morally and ethically opposed to any contribution by the oil and gas industry has zero credibility to me unless they walked or biked to this meeting. Absolutely. If you are going to say that you're opposed to it, the only reason the oil companies exist is people turn up in their cars, put the pump in, squeeze the trigger and pay the cash. If everybody stopped, the oil companies are gone, dead. So, just as people read Samuelson Economics 101, every time you spend $1 on something, it's a vote in favour of it. And everybody around this table voted in favour for the oil and gas industry. It has done for a long time and will do for quite a while. So I'm not going to buy that either. But I think there's another issue here. I read with growing concern the scientists who are talking about a doomsday effect. You know, they think this planet's got 20 or 30 years before we tip over the edge and we cannot retrieve the circumstances we're in. I read the other day that scientists are now writing off the Great Barrier Reef. For them, it's in its death throes.
Could you bring this back to...
The point about this is that we have trashed our environment because of the population boom, the way we've gone about it, and what little we can do to restore things we should do. And so if anybody says that we are in favour of maintaining a good environment and votes against this, has no credibility in my view. This is simply a small contribution. We should take their money. If they turn up here with mega millions, we should take that too and get on with the job.
You just brought me to tears.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. Everyone else has joined the fray, so I thought I'd better have my say as well. We would not even be having this conversation if it wasn't OMV and the relationship with oil exploration. We'd happily accept the money. The project is clearly a good project and hits many sweet spots for us as an organisation. So the only reason why we should have some doubts about this is because we don't trust ourselves to follow the right pathways. And frankly, I've got every confidence, just as Councillor Barker has, that this will not, or this relationship will not sway our decision making in any other matter that comes before this council for consideration. So I agree, we need to take this money. We have an opportunity to do good things with it, and I don't fear the consequences at all of the relationship with this oil exploration company. Councillor Curtin's raised an interesting matter in relation to the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity or Biodiversity Trust, and I also agree that they need to be involved in the setting out of this project. If they're not ready to handle it in year one, I'd like to see them involved further down the track, and I'm sure that that is where we'll end up. So I will support the resolutions.
I believe every councillor has spoken.
Point of order.
Brian, do you have anything you would like to comment? Yes, sir.
I've omitted to say that the chair, Rex Graham, wishes to be made known that he would vote in favour of this if he were here.
Point of order, Mr Chair, that's not a point of order.
That's right. That's right. I have some comments of my own, and then we'll proceed to the vote. I'm voting against this, and for 3 reasons, I guess, and none of which is that I am actually concerned about the integrity of our future decision-making processes around oil and gas or related matters. But what I am concerned about is a number of process things. We are taking it would appear, fairly aggressive position around oil and gas development as a council, or we are certainly progressing in that direction with a plan change and so forth. In view of that, and in view of a broader interest we are expressing in partnerships in general, and where we might find corporate or other philanthropic, but for purposes of this discussion, corporate support for various things we're doing, it does seem to me that we ought to be having a more strategic discussion, I guess, as we foreshadowed in the long-term plan, as to what kind of corporate funding or what constraints, if any, we wish to have as a matter of policy before jumping into a particular gift like this and jumping on it because the money seems hot. Ethically, I think what Councillor Barker has to say about "do we bicycle here" is pure nonsense. The notion that an oil company, as Councillor Dick said, could be a good corporate citizen is an oxymoron. I mean, we are so far beyond that point socially, economically, environmentally. We have zero business allowing our credibility to brush up against oil and gas companies and certain other companies at this point in our political evolution. And so I guess that indicates where I would come out if we had a strategic discussion as to where we should take money or where we should invest money in the future. So I think it's, to me, it's personally ethically abhorrent to as I think Councillor Bailey said, give permission or appear to be giving permission to operate in our ecosystem to a company like this. This company paid $1 billion over the last 10 years in royalties and taxes to the New Zealand government. That's $100 million a year. And they've come up here and dangled $50,000 a year, which is like beads for Manhattan. If they want to buy permission to do business and feel good about it, let's add a few zeros if we're going to do it. I mean, if we're going to be, if we're going to be awarding our permission, let's go whole hog, just as, so here we are with, this chump change $50,000 a year, which might make OMV feel good, which might add for a couple of sentences in their annual report, which might make their employees feel good about what they do. I'm not having a bar of it. And so, and that is not a comment on this project. I do think we're jumping the gun here process-wise, that we have a biodiversity strategy group that's meeting tomorrow again. It is trying to articulate what its initial priorities ought to be. We ought to give it a chance to do that. It might well be that this winds up as number 1 on the list, but it doesn't seem to me that there's any urgency to leapfrog a process that we've put in place where this could in fact turn out to be the leading signature project of that work group. And so I just think this whole thing is premature on top of everything else. And for all those reasons, I'll be voting against it. Councillor Dick, you have an opportunity to speak. Sorry? I didn't hear you. Sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, I just agree with your 50,000. Maoris know what it's like. We had axes and blankets.
Councillor Dick.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm tempted to reiterate everything that Councillor Barker has said because I agree with it wholeheartedly, but I'm not going to take unnecessarily time in the meeting. He has made the point and made it extremely well. The other comments that I would make are that yes, we are planning to do a plan change for oil and gas, but that is an entirely separate matter and it stands on its own feet. It's very early in its gestation and that really should be put aside in this argument, in my view. And lastly, I've heard some stuff today that really, I think, are quite insulting to this organisation that has made this generous offer. And, you know, to say that a petroleum exploration and production company is unethical organisation, that is stretching the boundaries. It's most certainly a legal organisation, and this planet is going to be relying on organisations like that to keep it sustained for another 50 or 100 years, as much as we intensify our efforts to become carbon free. So, councillors, I do recommend that you vote in favour of this.
So I'll call the question. All those in favour of the motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Nay. Like a division. All those in favour? And that's correct. Yep. And those opposed?
Thanks, Al. 20 pieces of silver.
Okay. Enjoy that 50 grand. Thank you, Campbell. So should we skip to, let's go do the LGOIMA. Okay. So we're going on to agenda item 7, which is the a process for handling LGOIMA requests going forward. And I'll turn that over to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I don't propose to speak at any length on this. The issues are well known to councillors around the LGOIMA, the ongoing set of LGOIMA issues with respect to councillor emails and the dialogue with the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has given an extension to the Council for requests made recently by the Hawke's Bay Today and Fairfax Media till the 21st of July. So the purpose of bringing this paper to this committee was to get endorsement of a new policy and protocol for dealing with councillor-related LGOIMA requests to enable us to use that policy to make some decisions on those requests that are before us and make a determination before the 21st of July. That would require, for formal adoption, the unanimity of the Council on this matter today, of councillors today, for it to be formally adopted prior to the 21st, given that the next Council meeting is on the 26th of July. However, if there is broad support for the approach taken, it may well be that we can simply just adopt this without having to take that step today. So essentially what is proposed here is that when a LGOIMA request is received that relates to any correspondence that may involve a councillor as a recipient or as the correspondent, that the first step will be to advise the councillor concerned that the request has been received, a request made of the councillor that their documents, correspondence in their possession, private email, etc., that is captured by the request be made available to the Chief Executive. In the event that that's not forthcoming, the policy recognises that the Chief Executive cannot physically retrieve that from the councillor, and they would then need to take up any subsequent concerns about the non-provision of that information with the Ombudsman themselves. The proposal would then involve the Chief Executive and the Chief Executive alone, considering the material, forming a preliminary view, consulting the councillors concerned on that preliminary view, receiving any further submissions from that councillor in relation to what may or may not be proposed for withholding, and then a final determination made by the Chief Executive. Look, it recognises the fact that matters involving councillor correspondence can be sensitive, and therefore it is ring-fencing consideration of the application of the Act to the Chief Executive and the Chief Executive alone. And it also recognises that the Chief Executive under law is the responsible person for whether or not the council is compliant with the LGOIMA. So, look, that's what's proposed, and I expect that there'll be a range of views around the council table on this matter, and more than happy to take questions.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thanks, James. I'm happy with your explanation. I just note that when it comes to councillors, you said in the first instance the councillors will be informed, but I don't read that here.
There was a revised version which unfortunately, I don't know where we got to, Leanne. It was due to go out. It was on the portal, yeah. So it went out electronically. I'm sorry, it's not in your hard copy. Look, this was done in a degree of haste last week after the Ombudsman gave us the date of the 21st, so apologies for that. We have got a new and improved version of this protocol, which was sent out electronically.
I haven't had an opportunity to read it, but the other comment, and I'm going off the paper one, so it may have changed, but date last reviewed June last month, next review date in 6 months' time. Is that meant to be? Do we want to be looking at it again so soon?
Leanne, do you want to speak to that? That was existing date, I think.
Sorry, that was the existing review date, so I just left it, not knowing what the outcome today would be.
Well, certainly that would be my preference as well.
Thank you, James. One question I had was, which I don't think was covered even in the updated draft, was cost recovery for councillors if they have to go through their own personal emails to find out all this information. You've got obviously council staff you can recover that time if it's over an hour, but there's no mention of any cost to the councillors of like say going through their personal emails. Is that tied up in there somewhere?
It's quite a good question, actually. It's not something that I believe we've given any consideration to. I think the way we do our accounting internally is that a staff salary is paid to a staff member, and it's a question of the apportionment of their time. We currently don't have any tracking procedure for apportioning how councillors spend their time for which they are remunerated. And therefore the parallel is really one of apportionment as opposed to an over and above cost, and that just recognises there's an opportunity cost for staff time that would otherwise be on another project, and that would be the reason that we would recover that cost, because that's taking council staff away from other business. I think you could apply that principle similarly to councillors. So I'd be comfortable with us recovering costs on that basis. What I'd be less comfortable about is any suggestion that councillor time would be invoiced, if you like, to the council as over and above their existing remuneration, because performing your functions under all legislation, including LGOIMA, would be captured by the functions of a councillor for which you have your standing remuneration. So I think there's definitely benefit in us capturing the time taken by councillors in responding to these issues, recording that and building that into our cost estimates that we would then provide to any applicant.
Thanks, Chair. So there are two problems here. The first is that it looks like not all councillors have had the opportunity to read the updated paper. The second problem, in my view, with this paper, James, as I discussed with you yesterday, is that I think you need to describe the process that you would go through in a little more detail that's actually covered in the paper currently. Specifically, there is the only things that are captured here is official information, and that's not actually described here. And also, there are exceptions to the release of official information and the grounds for that. And then there's an overriding public interest if it's official information that would normally qualify to be withheld. And I think you need to describe that in a little bit more detail for the benefit of councillors, so that they can see that there's a good process that's going to be followed. So I'd like to suggest that you take this paper and incorporate that into it, and then bring it back to us maybe at the next council meeting in a form that we can then adopt if you're comfortable to do that.
Look, I'm very happy to do so, and I appreciate that a more elaborate explanation of the tests in the Act may be helpful to lay out in the policy. It's only implicit at the moment, and we can certainly bring that back for the council meeting on the 26th. The slight problem we have is this deadline of the 21st, and so what I suggest I might do is get this worked up a little bit more, email it round to councillors by round robin, look at formal adoption on the 26th, but get some guidance as to whether collectively councillors are comfortable with the approach being taken, so that we can advance this request and try to achieve it before the 21st.
So why don't we continue this discussion so that James has whatever other feedback councillors want to give him as he proceeds with a rewrite of this. So, Councillor Barker.
I support that, because I had, when I read this last night, I didn't get to it till last night, I had the heebie-jeebies about this. There's lots of things in here which would deeply concern me. One of the things when I first down here, I thought on the champions, and we've got people named in things. When you've got documents, I believe in the anonymity of public service, and we have the issues being expressed before where staff have said they don't like people being named. This is going to be a policy document that operates here. It should be for the position, not the name. It's not the person. So I disagree with that. The points that Peter made about the frame of this is not in here. That there are things which are in and which are out. We didn't touch that at all here, and I think that's a significant failure. There's other things in here which worry me considerably. It appears that someone in writing this is trying to, or knows something, or thinks we should have some process of consultation, but this is a fatally flawed consultation process in here. It doesn't need to be written any longer, but there are significant weaknesses in here. There's another piece of jurisprudence, and that is that when you're in these processes, people have rights, and there's no mention of that at all. This is completely missing out of this. In terms of the process, the paper as it's written doesn't distinguish between individual councillors and all councillors. I see in the written thing we've tried to do that. I'm not a fan of the word affected. It seems like I've got a disease. I think we should find something else. The other thing that worries me is in 6.2.2, it says if a council chooses not to comply with the LGOIMA, well, there may be reasons why people are doing what they're doing, and by saying that someone's non-compliant, you're saying they're acting ultra vires. When you say in a document like this that they're acting ultra vires, you are determining that they are wrong. This is prejudice. I don't like that at all. This got me particularly agitated. The other thing is that I think you were right in your commentary to us today that the This is a matter between the Chief Executive. I see we've got the title Governance Manager in here. Well, Council's relationship is only with the Chief Executive. We don't have relationships with other staff. Let's be clear about that. We work with them informally because it's convenient, but our relationship is with you, the Chief Executive, and that's it. I expressed to you privately my concerns about Governance Manager as a title, because there's only 9 people involved in governance here. That's the ones around the Council. And if someone, the title says they are managers of governance, well, are you telling me that they're managing this council? Well, I don't think so. The issue here is we have staff here that support governance, and other councillors we have governance support, but not governance managers. The only governance manager I would see here would be the chair of the council, but even then, I don't think he would say that he manages people, he manages itself. So, I could go on. I do think that this is a serious piece of work. This is a serious issue, and it needs to be written to the highest standard. And in my view, this fails significantly on all fronts. So I'm with Peter. It needs to be withdrawn, written in a way which is to a standard which we think is appropriate for this council and for this region. I'm very, very unhappy with this paper.
Councillor Gurdon.
What else would you like?
Sorry?
That's okay. Mr.
I don't want to be ambiguous.
Mr. Chair, James, I wonder if you could help me please at 5.8 in your narration. The definition of correspondence, we've got letters, emails, file notes. Can you give me a sense of how broad the correspondence is? I mean, does it include texts, tweets, Twitters, telephone messages? What's the extent of the term correspondence? And then I've got another question after that.
So, look, the Ombudsman ruled in relation to text messages in relation to the Prime Minister, you may recall, several years ago, and texts are included, as are recollections of meetings, if you like. Now, it's very, very rare that anyone has been able to, in the history of the Official Information Act or the LGOIMA Act, been able to obtain recollections of meetings, but certainly meeting notes. It's effectively any form of documentation that captures official information. So that includes photographs, video. It's very, very open-ended.
Would it cover, so it definitely covers text. What about telephone messages?
They are captured.
Sure.
If they're saved on your phone, they are.
They are, correct.
So in terms of 5.8, we need to give greater definition to that.
Understood, yes.
The other, I see at 5.10 the reference to zero return process PROMAP. That would be in danger of being redundant if we change, so I'm wondering why you're
Look, it's a process mapping tool that we have internally. Yep. We can easily update it, so I think.
What I'm saying is that do you need a reference to that in a policy document as opposed to council's reporting system?
Well, look,
Generic term.
this document is primarily drafted to guide staff so they understand what the rules and the processes are. PROMAP effectively enables us to give a step-by-step.
I know what it does.
Yep.
So moving on then to 6.2.5 at the bottom. I'm interested to know and having it spelt out to me what you regard your responsibilities to be under the Act, and explicitly stating the element of the Act that applies. So that would be useful for me to be clear on what that is. And the consequence of that is, can you tell me if we altered after the consultation with councillors, that the council make a final determination? So the question to you is, yes, you may determine, and that may be your mandate under the legislation, but in terms of release of the information, are you obliged to release the information, or could that task be ascribed to council itself?
So it's less a question of my mandate and it's more a question of my obligation to ensure that the organisation is compliant with the legislation. So the legal responsibility for the regional council as an institution to be compliant with the Act and LGOIMA requests are levelled at the institution fall to me, and I can't contract out of that. I can delegate to a staff member or an officer of council. I cannot delegate that to councillors. So a decision by council, a final decision by council, puts me in a situation where I am the one legally responsible for decisions over which I don't have final control, and therefore the recommended approach by the Ombudsman historically in this regard and the way in which it is managed in the rest of the public sector, and you can think about chief executives in relation to ministers. Ministers are not accountable for departmental compliance with the Official Information Act. Chief executives are by law. And so I guess the issue and the difficulty I have is that while I have that legal responsibility, and it's not only to comply under the Act, it's a condition of my employment contract, that I can't contract that out, and therefore the final decision does need to rest with me. Now, what I've tried to reflect in this policy is my intention to consult in every manner possible with councillors on that decision, but ultimately it does rest with me, and I think that's kind of the bottom line. I'm more than happy in bringing this back to provide greater elaboration around those provisions within the legislation that do set that out.
Mr. Chairman?
Councillor Dick.
Well, a question first. Who actually is the governance manager? As a matter of curiosity. Okay, congratulations. And this issue of the deadline of the 21st, how did that arise?
Look, it was arbitrarily given to us in effect by the Ombudsman on the basis that we're already out of time with respect to the timelines in the Act, given how protracted this issue has been.
Can you not attempt to get a small extension past the council meeting, because...
Look, I think that's entirely
in my
possible.
view, putting out 9 emails and then having to edit 9 returning emails to try and formulate something, just dog's breakfast. It's far better to have something that's worked up properly and it's on paper and in front of you on the decision day.
Well, I think on the basis of the additional amendments that have been sought in relation to this policy, that the Ombudsman's likely to consider it reasonable that we take the time to have that formally adopted and then apply the policy. But I just do note that for the requesters concerned, they have been waiting quite some time for some resolution of this matter. But yeah, I'm more than happy to take that back to the Ombudsman.
Could I move that this matter lie on the table until council meeting and the chief executive attempts to get a short extension to the deadline?
If you would bear with me, I'd like to make a couple of comments first.
Yeah.
To me, there are a number of issues been raised about the fulsomeness of this and the completeness of it, which is understandable. I see the value in that, but it seems to me the most critical piece of feedback that the chief executive needs is whether, in fact, the role that he has identified for himself in this process, when issues of councillor correspondence are what's on the table, are we comfortable with him in the role that he has set out here, given what background he has provided about the legal responsibilities he must meet as chief executive under this Act and the Local Government Act. So is there anybody who has a problem with that? Because if so, somebody needs to put on the table an alternative that as to how such matters would be adjudicated internally. So far, I haven't heard any proffered by anyone. So I guess I'm assuming that we are accepting the notion here that the chief executive has to be the pivot person here in the manner that has been described. Is there, if there's a disagreement with that, I think we need to hear it today so that it can be weighed or even tested legally, I guess, if need be.
Well, can I put the alternative to you, Tom? I don't think there can be an alternative. I have heard it discussed that the councils themselves could meet and have a conclave of councillors to decide whether it complied or not. This would breach every justice rule that ever was written about incident. We would be judge and jury on our own trials. You can't do. The point is that it has to be an independent decision maker, and if it's not the chief executive as an independent decision maker, who is it? The only other person after that is the ombudsman. You know, so it seems to me that the chief executive is the pivot point in the first instance without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think it can be any other way.
Okay.
We can't be our own judges and jurors on our own thing. You know, I just don't think that works at all. It would have no credibility. So I can't see any alternatives. I think that's done. What we have to have around it is good processes and clear statements about how the structure works, which we don't have at the moment.
Peter, is that, do you have that, share that view?
I mostly share it. I mean, I think there is the opportunity for us as peers to sit in and make decisions where we're not actually directly involved ourselves, but only one or two councillors are. But that probably creates an extra layer of complication that we can do without. So I'm inclined to agree with what Councillor Parker has said, and that in the end, the mandate or the authority to do this must sit with the chief executive. And I've just been looking through the Act, and the chief executive is mentioned on numerous occasions, so he clearly has a significant role to play here. So I'm inclined to support that.
And I'd just like to comment on the point that Paul raised at the outset. I did a simple word search of my email in connection with one of the requests that is sitting on the table here, and discovered I had 800 and some emails that might theoretically be caught in that net. And so, and that was incoming email. That wasn't, you know, that wasn't any emails that I might have sent, and so forth and so on. So the prospect of meeting a request of that nature is pretty daunting. For me to sit and read through 800 and some emails so that I can determine whether or not by their content they are relevant or to the request that's being made is something that couldn't be delegated to anybody. It couldn't be, I mean, I'd have to sit there and do that. And my alternative is to simply say to you as the chief executive when that request comes in is, no, I only have 8. And then what are you going to do? I don't have 868, I have 8. And you know, some of these requests create really ludicrous situations, and I would feel if for no other reason it would be prudent on my account to say no thank you, I'm not going to provide this information because I simply don't I have a life. I don't have time to go through 800 or possibly 1,600 emails, and you don't have time, if you multiply that by 6 or 7 other councillors, to go through several thousand to make your judgment as to whether these should be released or should not be released. I understand the process we're going through here, but we're going to wind up with a process that isn't going to actually solve the underlying issue here without the ombudsman giving a serious think to what's the can of worms that's involved in dealing with this. If he expects you as a chief executive, he and his staff in turn, once somebody says no thank you, and it bumps to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman requests the 868 emails, are they actually going to sit and read through these one by one and decide, which is what they've done in my initial request, where there were only 8 involved. So, fine, we can expand upon the policy and feel good that we have a formal policy about this, but in the execution of it, we're still going to have very significant problems if this remains the way we deal with these kinds of fishing expeditions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will move that the matter lie on the table to the council meeting and that the chief executives seek a short extension from the ombudsman. If there's a seconder.
I'll say that as long as the mover moves and a thorough review of the current document we undertaken.
Well, we'll add that in, shall we?
Yep.
Okay. And in speaking to it, I'd just like to comment on the chairman's comments and suggest that we keep it simple and that we move on and get out of this thing and get back to doing the business that we're paid for. And one way to do that is actually be a little bit careful about how you communicate with people.
Are you satisfied with that motion, or is that?
Look, Leon's just pointed out if it lies on the table and it remains stuck at this council at the Environment and Services Committee table and doesn't progress therefore through, so we do want to take it to the council meeting on the 26th. So I think perhaps if your motion was just to refer the matter for further discussion on the 26th council meeting.
Is there a seconder for that?
And you seconded that the paper be thoroughly reviewed.
All those in favour? Any other comments?
I would just like to make a comment.
Yeah,
Comment, Chair. The comment by the mover that all it needs to happen is that we need to be a little bit more careful about how we communicate with each other flies straight to the very heart of this matter as to the concerns I have about the fishing expedition around the emails I have with my fellow councillors. I do not want to be careful about my language with my fellow councillors when I'm communicating and discussing issues with them. I do not want to be concerned about the language that constituents use when they're emailing me about concerns. That, to me, like I say, flies right to the very heart of this matter.
Yes, Chair. I'll support the motion as well, but the fundamental problem here is that this Act dates from 1987, and I had a look through the amendments, and it's barely been changed since. Now, think since 1987, 30 years ago, how correspondence and communication between people has changed. And, where you might have picked up the phone or had a face-to-face meeting with somebody 30 years ago, now you'll send them a note. And all of that gets captured, and it gets captured by this Act. And I actually think that the Act is long due for revision because it captures a whole lot of stuff that that nobody contemplated in 1987. So it's a dinosaur of an Act, which is now causing us huge problems. So we need to this paper on how we're going to respond to it, James, is actually quite important, and we need to be very careful how we frame the thing up, and that's why you got some the commentary that you did, and clearly we need to have agreement and comfort around how this thing does, and the point that was raised by Tom earlier about the range of information that now gets captured. I think you need to capture that problem in here by talking about the scope and narrowing the scope from the requests you get.
Right now, you, James, are attempting to deal with the immediate 2 requests that are sitting in front of you and the rest of us, and and you've had an interaction with the Ombudsman about that, and some of us have had the opportunity to meet with him about that. But I guess my view, given echoing what Peter has said, is that as a council, I think we also need to be in a advocacy position about the act. And that maybe as a follow-on, maybe we get this issue resolved one way or the other, or maybe as a piece of it, it seems to me we ought to be on record at some point as articulating some of the issues that we think are legitimately being raised here as to the workability of this act. So as opposed to just dealing with the specifics of these requests, because they're only going to proliferate. Opposed? Carried. So I think it's coffee break time, and then we'll come back to the RWSS issue.